Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is time once again for Catalog and Cocktails, presented by Data.World. It's an honest, no BS, non-salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd, product guy, customer guy at Data.World, joined by co-host Juan Tshaped.
Hey, Tim, I'm Juan Tshaped. I'm the principal scientist at Data.World. And as always, it's a pleasure. We're here Wednesday, middle of the week, end of the day. It's 5 p.m. right now where I am on the East Coast. I'm actually live from Atlanta while you're up in Austin. And today we have an awesome show today because we're meeting today with our guest, Alex Vayner, who is the managing director of data science and AI at KPMG. And what was super awesome is that we met at the MIT CDAO IQ conference last year, and we really hit it off. And I think it was the honest, no BS-ness of things.
That's right.
Cheers. How are you doing? Glad to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So let's kick it off. What are we drinking and what are we toasting for?
Oh, yeah. Well, toasting is I'm Eastern European, so I grew up in the tradition of making toasts. I guess maybe let's toast the customer. The customer, right? So Peter Drucker said the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. So
I like that. And what are you drinking today?
And what I'm drinking is a Lagavulin 16 Islay Scotch, neat. Just because life is pain and suffering, and this is the best representation of that in liquid form. So.
No need to complicate it any more than that. How about you, Tim? I think you're kind of in the similar vein right now.
I'm on the same page with Alex here, maybe a slightly more optimistic tone, but I am drinking this Springbank single malt. It was distilled 23 years ago, and it is very wonderful. So, cheers. And I'll say cheers to customer as well, because being the chief customer officer over at Data.World, that really resonates with me. So, cheers to that.
And I'm drinking what's called here an Old Irv. It's imagine an old fashioned and a mule had a baby, so it's like rye whiskey and ginger beer and bitters. It's actually pretty refreshing. So I'm something kind of very easy to go do at home. Looking forward to having more of these. And yes, cheers to customers. I reminds me of what is an organization, right? It's a human endeavor where there's people who get together because they have a common goal that they want to accomplish. And then there's people on the other side who you want to accomplish that goal for. So yeah, to people and who are customers. Cheers. All right, so we got our warm-up question. Today's episode is all about the DNA of a data organization. What is one DNA trait you think would be awesome to have?
So I don't know if this is technically a trait, but the thing that I've been after the most is resilience, right? And I think that in today's world, when you're beaten down every time, or there's a new technology up and around every time that forces you to learn and then to fail, resilience is becoming really like the number one trait for me. So resilience.
I like that. I was thinking like, I don't know, is it like some crazy, almost superhero type of stuff? But now that you said that,
that is the crazy superhero stuff.
That is, yeah. Well, I always talk about the balance between efficiency and resilience, and I think we always kind of over focus on being efficient, but we need to be more resilient in this world. So I'm with you on that one.
When I became a parent, this is about 15 years ago, I thought about like, what's my mission for the kids? And what I defined for myself was that I was going to focus on raising resilient problem solvers. So that's kind of resilience has kind of been around for me for a while. That's the motto.
Resilient problem solvers. Love that. Tim.
I thought resilience was great. I think my serious answer would be along the same lines, patience. I think if patience is something that you can have and pass down, then I think that's great. My less serious answer would be, can you be born with muscles where you never have to work out and you just have them, right?
All right. That's a good one too. All right, let's just kick it off. Honest, no BS. What should the DNA of a data organization be?
Yeah. No, that's I think that's the problem to tackle. I guess maybe I would start with the head of the organization, right? The chief data analytics officer. And I think that the noise that you hear a lot is the high turnover of chief data and chief analytics officers. So that's one of the things to tackle, because if you don't have one consistent leader, it's very hard to have any kind of a structured, well-run machine that is the organization. And I think, even Tom Davenport, who is the sort of the oracle of analytics, right, wrote an article, I think, a couple of years ago on this, and he had a perspective which I think boiled down to, it's a very new role, so it's hard, and the expectations are very high for chief data analytics officers. Those kind of like the big takeaways. So, but I think there's like, I've been thinking about it for a long time, and for me, that it's so much more multifaceted and complex than that. So I think that would be a great thing to talk about. And I think that probably number one thing that jumps to mind is like, even defining what is the problem, right? So you've probably heard this, at least as a mathematician, right? Defining the problem well is half the battle. So what is it a problem at all? And so one of the things I remember being struck by is that, forgot where I read this, but it was a statistic that if you look at the S&P 500 in the 1950s, the average age of a company was about 60 years old. And if you look at it now, it's about plus or minus 15. So the average age of a company in S&P dropped by a factor of 4. And if you think about like tenure of executives, and even more so tenure of just regular data scientists and data engineers, you can't really, have higher tenure of the company, right? Like just the math doesn't work. So if the average tenure used to be you'd have 3 jobs in a career, right? 15 to 20 years. Now the average tenure in general is, divide that by 4, right? So now you're talking about 3-4 years. So it's all of a sudden the average tenure for chief data analytics officer, which is I think about 2.5 years, right? That's not so much off the average tenure period. And all of a sudden, it's like a 1 sigma. It's not a 5 sigma. So that's also like a difference in perspective, right? Like, oh, okay, so yeah, it should be a little bit longer, but it shouldn't be 3 times longer, right? So that's kind of like the one thing that, like, I was present to, is just the idea, like, wow, like that's different. Like the world has changed, and we kind of, woke up and said, oh, well, chief data analytics officer's tenure is too short. Like everything is too short.
That's interesting. I've heard that a lot before. The S&P, 60 years old, now it's 15 years old. Like the rate of change and turnover within companies and innovation, it's accelerating, right? But I haven't heard it applied to things like jobs before and people's roles in organizations. So do you think that's a problem? Is it a problem?
I think that I think it's a problem. It's just not as big of a problem as we think it is. And I think that it's reasonable to think it will get a little bit better. But I think that just referencing that and having the sense of, okay, it's a problem, but it's not the biggest problem out there, is a good point. I think the other one that, at least as I was reflecting on this, that jumped out at me, and it resonates with what Tom was saying a little bit, is in terms of expectations. Like in this role, first of all, you have to assume this person does a very good job managing up, right? Managing to the CFO in the business and being the translator of data and insight to business value. At the same time, you want this person, right? We're in a talent shortage time, right? Right now, we got the Great Resignation, we got quiet quitting, all of these forces that emphasize, even today, after all of these rifts that are happening in the last 4 or 5 months, in the data space, it's still highly desirable. There's still more jobs than there are applicants. And so the question is, how do you attract talent? And if you want to attract data scientists, data engineers, data architects, you can't be the business guy, because those guys want to come and they want to learn from someone. They want a leader who's actually an expert in some aspect of data. So that's hard, right? And then the other part that's struck me as I deal with a lot with chief data analytics officers, that's usually who I work with as a consultant, is that this incredible expectation that they should know everything, not only being able to sell to the business, but within the supply side of things, right? That's a demand. But the supply side, knowing engineering, architecture, transformation, cloud, machine learning, all of the aspects of that, it's unprecedented, right? And it's I don't think it's realistic. And I think that's one of the challenges.
Let's dive into a couple things here. One is about kind of the breadth of knowledge of what a CDO or CDAO should have. So that's one thing I want to dive into. But before we go into that, when you talked about kind of like, oh, there's a lot of people there's a lot of jobs, right? And also the people want to get those jobs. So they want to be more into the technical side, and so if you're only talking about the business, they want to attract those people. But this reminds me of the conversation we had a while ago with Bill Inman, right, the father of the data warehouse, and he made this great statement, which was, we have loyalty, technologists have loyalty to the technology and not to the business, and that's why they start jumping from place to place. So I'm like, I get that I want to go work in a place where they have great technology. I'm going to go learn. But then going back to what we were cheering on, and where's the customer? This great technology isn't always providing value to the customer you need to go do. So I think there's like some realism that we need to ground it. And sometimes like, hey, guess what? Like the really cool things that you want to go do is probably not what this organization needs. And then everybody's just going off and trying to look for something that actually is not what's providing business value. And that, in a way, it's kind of what we're in a sort of a bubble, I would argue.
So I would say, to me, that feels like a false dichotomy. Okay. The idea of like technology or business. As a data scientist, what I want to do, I want to be around other data leaders, and I want to learn from them, and I want to be part of the conversation, and I want competence. So I want my boss to be able to say, oh, you were saying this model takes 4 weeks to build. Like, I think that, actually you're being too aggressive. It should take 7, because you're going to spend 3 weeks just cleaning and structuring data first, right? Like, what are you thinking even? Oh, I wanted to say, why are you building a support vector machine model, right? Like, why aren't you doing something like logistic regression that's much simpler, or k-means clustering, or whatever that is? I want to learn from people. I want someone who understands how long and how something gets done. That's the part that's important to me if I'm thinking about being a data scientist. Now, there's different career tracks. If I'm thinking of being a business analyst, the business side of the equation is important to me. But you got to have somebody, if it's not the chief data officer, then it's their number 2 who brings in that data competence, right? So that's what I'm finding is really resonating with people. And when when it's someone with an MBA who's never actually written code and never built a model, they kind of take a look back and say, okay, is this really the person who is going to help me grow as a data engineer or a data architect or data scientist?
Okay, I appreciate that balance right there, because I mean, as going back to the previous point of like, oh, it's so broad, kind of the CDAO role. You need to involve not just all the technology, which that by itself goes into so many different kind of aspects. It's the business side, which that itself also can go into so many parts. But then, if we go back to like the original question of what is the problem? How would you articulate the problem that the CDAO should be focusing on addressing?
So for sure, the problem they should be focusing on is the value problem, right? How do I get to have data connect to business value, and doing it as quickly and as effectively as possible? So probably if I was to choose between supply and demand, between strong knowledge of data and data systems, and really understanding the business and being able to articulate what you're doing to support the business and business value, I'd probably put business value first and foremost. But then you have to quickly compensate for the fact that you may be lacking in the data and the tech stack. And it may be a challenge for you to hire and retain great talent, which is, as we know, one of the key problems today. So that's the balancing act. You always have the supply and demand, and that's the tricky part of the CDO role. And I think almost as tricky, maybe even trickier than the second part, which we mentioned already, which is like being a jack of all trades, right? Like understanding enough and maybe being a true master in one of the disciplines, right? Like let's say machine learning, but really understanding cloud and architecture and integration enough to be competent. And it just, I don't think that's possible. Like if you look at other disciplines that stopped being possible long ago, like if you look at math, there is no one person who understands all of the mathematics of today. I think the last person who in math who was able to do that. I don't know if you guys heard of Henri Poincaré. He was a mathematician in mid 19th century, early 20th century. He's like most known for the Poincare conjecture that was like just proved 20 years ago, and it was like an open problem for like a long time. But he was the last person to have been able to say, I understand all of contemporary mathematics, from topology to number theory to combinatorics to analysis to group theory, all of it combined. And like he could talk intelligently and read up on any paper. If you take a mathematician today who's a topologist and give him a number theory paper, they won't be able to follow past the first half a page, right? Like, or they go to a talk, after the first 5 minutes they're lost, right? Because the fields progress too far. So same thing is happening in data science, except faster, right? Like there is no Poincaré in data science anymore. There is no one person who understands the depth, because we're moving too fast, right? It's that Ray Kurzweil, like where the law of accelerating returns, right? Like it's moving so fast that change in 2 years in data science is like change in 100 years.
Yep.
Yeah, it's becoming harder to keep up with everything, given the rate of innovation and change, and just the breadth of everything that's happening now, right? And when you were just mentioning about having some depth maybe in one thing, but also being a jack of all trades, being sort of dangerous across a variety of disciplines, I thought of like a T-shaped person. So is the CDO, is the best DNA for a CDO to be kind of this T-shaped person, maybe even like a comb-shaped person, if they can have some depth in multiple things, but now you're starting to get a little bit more unicorny, at least a T-shaped person?
I think so, because you got to have at least some competence in some aspect of data. I just don't think that the data scientists and engineers will respect you if you're just a business person. You might be able to get the business side and get them enrolled and get them to to prioritize things the right way, which is a big challenge, right? Getting that ROI. It's a huge challenge and a lot of the people that are data oriented don't know even how to think about this, right? But you gotta be good at some aspect of the data ecosystem in order to have the respect, I think, of the people, so they can say, okay, I'll follow you as a leader because I know that you have distinctions in the data space.
I think that's actually some interesting advice, because I think sometimes when folks feel like maybe I only have business experience, or maybe I only have this horizontal experience, sometimes they think that I have to just continue to boil the ocean when it comes to my skills and just kind of stay at the high level, right, and never go below the water. It sounds like you're kind of saying that maybe you don't know data engineering, and so it's maybe that's not your specialty, but maybe you can get a little deeper in data science. And now, even though you only have one area that you've built some expertise in, you're going to be able to command more respect now, because, sure, you don't know data engineering, but you know some data science, so you can talk the talk there, and you can provide useful recommendations, and that actually makes you more respected across all the disciplines.
That's right. It just grounds you. Like somebody can connect to you, and it just gives you a lot of credibility. I think that's a part that's missing.
And then also something I remember a long time ago, we had a conversation with Mohammed Osser, who was a former CDO of McKinsey, and he had like all these different types of CDOs, which is like, are you the ones about security and compliance? So you focus all on your thing about security and compliance, or are you the one about the data entrepreneur? Like I have data, I want to make use some value out of my data, generate insights and monetize it. Am I the one who's about the culture and democratization? So making sure I'm enabling everybody to do it. So it also depends on kind of what the face of the company is, what they're trying to go do. I mean, what does success mean from a business perspective? So I think there's a lot to consider on the CDO. And one thing we were talking before was, how would you compare kind of where CDOs and CDAOs are today with respect to like the evolution of CIOs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like CIOs got off to a great start in the 80s, right? That's kind of the birth of the CIO, and then in the early 80s you already had hundreds of them, and now we have tens of thousands of them. So if you think about it, that's from now until mid 80s, that's 40 years, right, of development. And I think that we are maybe like 5 years in with chief data and analytics officer, so we got lots of room to grow. I don't think though that, but again, the Kurzweil thing, right? Like the progress is much faster now than it was 20 years ago, so it's even more challenging. So I expect that our evolution will be even faster. So and the role and the expectations for it are even higher. So that's the challenge. So lessons to learn from CIO
Yeah.
for sure. And right now, I think at least a third of the chief data analytics officers that I talk to report into the CIO, right? And that's also part of the challenge, right? The CIO doesn't consistently report into anyone. Some of them report into CFO, some of them report to CEO, like some of them report into
COOs.
right? And now the chief analytics officers, like now it's okay, some into the CIO, some into the CFO, some into the president of a business, right? Some into the COO as well. So there's a lot of complexity, and there's no one framework that says this is the best path for for companies to follow.
This is something I've been asking now, and actually for folks who don't who are seeing us, right? You know that we're in this very intimate candlelight dinner because we're at the Honest No BS dinner we're having here in Atlanta today. We've been doing several of these dinners, and something I've been asking everybody is, who do you report to? Just to go, because it's very interesting to see people's like, oh, you report to the CFO, you report to the CEO. It's like people don't even realize, and then the conversation gets really interesting. So, based on what you work with so many different customers and see, what are the patterns that you're seeing of reporting? Like, where does data end up reporting, and is there a way that you can say like, oh, this reporting path is the one for most success or something? Is that even possible to find that playbook? Or
so what I so first, the answer is like there's not one simple consistent answer, even within an industry, right? Or even within a company size, right? If you say, look, I'm going to focus on a $1 to $5 billion company versus like a $40+ billion a year no, or I'm going to focus on consumer goods and retail versus financial services, still all over the place. Here's like the only thing that I've observed to be consistently, not always, but a thread where the data analytics organization begins. It usually, wherever it lives, it begins with a leader, and it's completely centralized. And it's a good thing in the beginning because you want some consistency in your tech stack, some consistency in your trainings, some consistency in your data. And as it grows, it usually realizes and it matures that can't keep up with the demand. The demand from the business moves too fast. So what they begin to do is begin to decentralize, right? And begin to spread, which is a fantastic thing. That's exactly what should be happening. And you could see decentralization is just like almost like a universal force, right? Like you can't stop it.
The moment you're decentralizing is because you're growing, you're maturing, you're getting better.
And and now you get concepts like data mesh and data fabric and data products come up because that's how you empower your business partners to go and build their own products, right? To build their own solutions, to build their own dashboards, all of those things. So that trend is happening. And I think that if you're seen, right, so IT, generally speaking, IT is a cost center, right? And what you want your analytics organization to be is a value driver. So if you're part of IT, the value prop is I'm going to help you, the CIO, move from being a cost center to a value driver. What a fantastic story. If you're not, that means that you don't even have the part that may weigh you down. Now there's a cost to that because the architects are still going to be in IT. The cloud team is still going to be in IT. The CISO and security team is still probably going to be part of IT. And you're going to have to work harder to make sure that that team is really connected to what you're doing. But the thing that's consistent is that evolution from like centralized, because you gotta be one core, and you gotta have one machine that works well, and you're gonna have like data dictionaries, you're gonna have an ontology set, you're gonna have all those things, and then you begin to share that, and you begin to grow, and then and it's perfect because then you can actually start upskilling the broader organization. And now everyone's data, right? And now the core team focuses on less. They focus on some aspects of data governance, perhaps. Perhaps they focus on R&D, right? Like you, at the end of the day, you want your cutting edge development probably done within the people that are not using low code, no code solutions, but actually writing Python code and that can scale. That's a good thing. But really, a lot of the functions get democratized and get put out into the business, and that's a great thing.
Now, a lot of great nuggets that we need to go dissect that what we're going to have in our takeaways. But one thing that came up to me was understand if you are in the cost center or understanding you're in the value creation. I think that's going to really change the way you speak, the way you how you're going to convince people. But
yeah, I like that observation as well. Like, yeah, like a lot of times the CIO organization in a company may be thought of as more of the cost center, right? And so we always hear this like, oh, if the CDO reports to the CIO, then that can cause friction and things like that. And I thought you said that interestingly, Alex, that if you want that analytics is a value driver, so you're kind of implying that if it's part of the CIO group, then we need to recognize and embrace that CIO group is going to be not just a cost center, it's going to be a value driver organization. So I thought that's interesting.
And the truth is that this is not to dump on the CIO IT organization at all. I'm a big fan of Peter Drucker, as you guys probably picked up already. So Peter said a while ago that business has two functions, marketing and innovation. Everything else is a cost center. So it's not just IT, like literally everything is a cost center except for innovation. That's create new product, right? And marketing, like make that product accessible to the customer and hence create a customer, right? So that's it. So the idea is, what should analytics be focused on? Well, it should be focused on innovation, creating new products, and marketing, right? Like, getting new customers.
This is another thing that where should the data team, if it's going to start, right? Even in smaller companies, I'm like, oh, the first data team, we're going to do that. Who should you go work with first? Marketing. Always marketing. This is something. So this is actually a good conversation. Kind of shift this. We started from the top, right?
Yeah, let's go from the bottom, right? So we talked about the DNA of the top part of the head of the organization around data. What about from the bottom? Like, you're a data scientist, you're a data engineer. Now what? Like, what sorts of DNA should we expect there? What sorts of roles are most important there?
So I started thinking about this question a lot more in the last 4 or 5 months because I started seeing rifts, across the board happening. And then, friends from my network, from companies that I worked with before, reaching out and said, hey, I'm looking for something new. And, I started thinking about, so what are the different roles? What are the paths? And I thought back to my grad school. So when I was finishing grad school here at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, I had aspirations to getting a PhD. And then, towards the start of my second year, I realized that that's not it. And so it was clear that I'm going to finish second year and, get my master's and leave. And the only thing that was clear is I'm not going to be in academia. And that was it. So the world was basically binary. There's academia, that was a 1, and then there's everything else, that's a 0. And I kind of felt like I was selling out, of course, and disappointment to my advisor at the time, may he rest in peace now, who's a fantastic professor at the Georgia Tech, Richard Duke. But I did my master's thesis and I left, and I remember applying to, it was like a second thought. It was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go to CareerBuzz, and I dumped my resume in, and I got, a bunch of interest. And then I remember getting an offer from a consulting company, from FedEx, to be an operations research modeler, just doing optimization, which FedEx needs a lot of, and from Oracle. So I got a big tech, I got corporate America, and I got consulting. And my calculus for making the decision was okay, who's going to pay me most, right? If I'm going to sell out and not be in academia, I'm just going to, go and, to the highest bidder. And I did. Now, what ended up happening is I went to a fantastic strategy consultancy called Mars & Co. It's a spinoff from BCG from about 50 years ago. And in 2 years there, I got the best business education I could possibly dream of, right? Coming in as a mathematician and computer scientist, not really understanding even what is ROI, what is business, what is EBITDA, what is a 10K. These all were foreign terms to me because I mostly spent my time studying combinatorial algorithms. And it just now has a reflection on that. I kind of started thinking about, okay, and so I created these 6 categories of, I think there were professional services, corporate, then financial services, because that's a huge machine in of itself. Then startups, government, and NPOs, NGOs, and I think I'm missing a category here. It will come to me. I think there was definitely a 6th one. Big tech, big tech. So, and those were kind of, I don't know, a 6. This is not the truth or anything, right? Like you could create 7 or 9 and 27, but those were kind of the different options. And I started thinking about, okay, like these represent fundamentally different experiences for a data scientist or an analytics professional, right? So if you're working, so my love is consulting. I spent, at least 2/3 of my career in consulting. And I love it because it's fast paced. I love it because it gives me a lot of different experiences. Every 3, 6, 9 months, you got a new project, which means you have a new client, new industry, new project manager and partner, new team that you're part of. Everything is new. So that kind of appealed to the ADHD nature of me, right? Like just change, always change. And then you're always learning, right? Like, you're always learning new things, new industries, new companies, right? Understanding new technologies. So that was huge, but there's a cost, right? The cost is you're working 60, 70, 80-hour days. The cost is you travel all the time. So maybe if you're starting your family, and your primary caretaker, this may not be the ideal path for you. So like those are the considerations that I never thought of. And I thought about sort of things like, what is the risk here? Like the risk of being fired. What is the environment culturally? Is it structured, right? A lot of clear paths on what you're doing, why you're doing it, or is it unstructured? Is there depth of learning? Like, hey, I'm going to do NLP, and that is all I do. Like, if you're in consulting and you just want to do computer vision, it's going to be very hard for you as a data scientist, because you could be, and there are a few people that are super specialists, but usually if you're a data scientist, you might be doing, logistic regression model today, in an NLP model in Python tomorrow, and a fraud analytics model the day after. And those are all things that you may be, that's part of your regular year. But if you go for work for big tech, so you go work for Microsoft, that's very unlikely to happen. You're more likely to be on the opposite side, right? You're more likely to be highly, narrowly specialized, right? Because they have tons of PhDs. And there's no reason for them to have people that do NLP and computer vision in the same camp. They'll have 1,000 people just doing NLP, and they'll have 1,000 people just doing computer vision, and that is all you'll be doing. So if you have a PhD and you want to specialize and you want to do one thing, it's a much easier fit into the big tech world versus the consulting world, right? And so those are some of the considerations like I started thinking through. And if startup, completely different space, right? Like, again, you can be a data engineer, an architect, and a data scientist all in one in a small startup, right? Potentially, that's a possibility. That will never happen in big corporate today or in big tech, right? You're going to be one or you're going to be the other. You can have a ton of breadth and you can have a ton of depth in a startup, right? That's the beauty of a startup, is you're wearing lots of hats because it's small. Right, so they want a little bit more of a unicorn. Big tech doesn't hire unicorns anymore. Big tech hires, hyper specialists.
Yeah, Alex. Oh, go ahead, Juan.
No, you go, Tim.
I was going to ask if you're, so it's interesting to hear from the perspective of like, if you're an academic and like, here's what here's the, like where you might find a better fit for you. If you want to try a bunch of stuff, then maybe a startup is a great fit for you. What if you want to be like a CDO someday, right? Like where's, like, if you were going to design the perfect path, what path do you recommend somebody start on the ground floor as an analyst? Do you recommend they start in the business and then change careers 10 years in? Like, what's the perfect path?
Well, this is a fascinating question.
Yeah, that is a strong question. So let me give you my jaded answer first, because I'm like a Eastern European, sort of hyper-realist pessimist. So that part of me,
Eastern European hyper-realist pessimist.
Yes.
Oh, that needs to go on a T-shirt too.
So, so I was born in Moldova, which is one of the 15, Soviet republics. So like my experience, there's a psychological theory that says whatever you experience in the world when you were 9, 10, 11, that is kind of like embedded in your brain as how you perceive the world. So like my 9, 10, 11 is like standing in bread lines, and like life is hard, right? So like that's the hyper realist, pessimist like side of me. So if you want to be a chief data analytics officer, I think like you should be in corporate, right? Because corporate will arm you for not only the technical skills, which are important, but the political, environmental, cultural, structural skills that make for a chief data analytics officer, right? You'll learn that. That's number one. Number two, when some company like Heidrick struggles or Egan Zander, or replace it by one of those top executive retained search firms that usually look for a chief data analytics officer or any senior executive role, they will say, okay, I'm looking for a corporate leader. Like, does this person have a corporate track record? I guarantee you, if you've spent 20 years in startups and you want to be the chief data analytics officer of Coca-Cola, it's not happening. Like, it's not. Right? They're going to look at you and say, do you even know what it means to be a senior executive in an organization with 100,000 people in it? Like, no. Okay, so I think that if you spend your entire life at Microsoft or or Apple or Google, they'll say the same thing. Like, yeah, he's probably a fantastic technologist, but like, does he know how to run a team in corporate America that is not pure tech, that is consumer goods or manufacturing or financial services? Very different. So I think that what kind of chief analytics officer do you want to become? Do you want to become, that person in corporate America? Then go into corporate America.
So you're saying that chief data officers really don't exist in the big techs? They don't exist in startups? And
they exist. They have like, who is the chief analytics officer of Google? Like, I don't even know what that means. Like, the whole company is analytics, right? Like what does that person even do? But if you say like, okay, you're the chief analytics officer of like UPS, that's a company here in Atlanta, right? Oh, I know exactly what that means. Okay, like, because they deliver packages, right? They don't build data, right? Like they're,
but,
so.
But it's a very valid point, and I completely agree with it. But now, where there's still data work, data teams in startups, in these big tech stuff. So
Sure.
where do they fit inside of that organization?
So now you're getting into nuances like, first of all the big techs are getting sectorized, right? So nobody's just data, right? So if you go to Microsoft and their professional services, they have a healthcare team, they have a financial services team, right? Both on the product side and on the professional services side, right? So what that means is that if you're becoming a leader in that team, okay, you have experience selling into, let's say you're in healthcare, you have experience selling to, payers and providers. Oh, that's interesting, because now when you come to interview with, let's say Blue Cross Blue Shield, like, you can talk very intelligently about like, what do providers need, and how does it work, and what are the data sets, what are the security concerns, what are the PII issues, all of those things. You'll be very credible. But I think the more traditional path is, so I'm not a chief data analytics officer. I'm a managing director in a consultancy. Now you could say like, a lot of what I do is I work with chief data analytics officers, but I think that the skill set, besides understanding of analytics and data, is very different in a consultancy than it is in corporate. Yet still, you see people move to and fro, right? It's not unusual for somebody to spend 10 years in the industry and then come into consulting and then go back and do this. And I've done this myself.
Just to go back a little bit to the bottoms up piece, because I think this is a very interesting conversation where we talked about the CDO and like the path that you can get to it. And so if you like, what is the best way to organize the bottom up part of the data organization, right? Like, should there be the data engineering group and the data science group and the analyst group, or should it be you talked a little bit about sectorized, right? I think especially larger organizations that have more decentralization going on, you see more of, hey, let's sectorize and have the expertise more embedded in things like that. Like, is there a framework that you think about as, not just the CDO and their DNA, but sort of the DNA of how the broader data organization needs to look?
So there are clear structures and and teams that are, I think, are pretty well known. I don't think I'm going to innovate by saying, okay, you need to have a team that focuses on data governance, right, and data management, and you're going to need to have a team that focuses on your integration with cloud and sort of data integration team. You need to have a team of AI ML experts that are actually building models, right? You need to have a team that focuses on reporting, visualization, because that's how your insights get consumed by the business, right? You need probably to have a team that focuses on actually being the liaison to major businesses and domains. So if in the traditional American corporations, there are at least 2, 3, 4 different divisions, right? That are focused on different products or services. And then their functions also: marketing, finance, supply chain, right? So you may want to have, especially within your data science and AI/ML team, people that start focusing on those major domains. And you also want to have people that are in part of your, what you can call go-to-market operations team, that focus on being the liaisons to marketing, supply chain, finance, capability wise, presidents or senior executives of various businesses, right? Because the idea, remember, is that as you mature, you want more and more of your organization to move into the businesses and into the functional domains like marketing and supply chain, and to consolidate your team. So when you're in your sort of year 3, 4, 5, and you're in what we call sort of mature embedded analytics organization, like you have very little dashboarding people on your analytics team, because you don't need to run that many dashboards as an analytics team. Guess who needs dashboards? The CFO needs to see what's going on financially. The chief marketing officer wants to see how his marketing mix model is actually playing out, and how his ROI on different parts of the marketing dollar is coming up, right? The supply chain officer needs to have a dashboard that maybe pops up when there's a problem in distribution somewhere, right? Or where there's an inventory problem. So those things are needed in the business or in the functional domains. So why have them in your analytics team?
That was a very beautiful setup that you had there.
Oh.
And I'm really happy that you brought this up, and I think this is something that we need to highlight. This was like minute 40 of the podcast to go listen to. This is
all right.
really, really nice. We have you can see all the notes that we have, but we could keep talking about this for hours. And luckily, I am going to keep talking for hours with you after this, because we're going to have dinner. But all right, we need to move on. Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we're going to move on to this other segment that we kind of forgot to do last time, but we're going to bring back the AI minute. See,
Okay.
We didn't talk anything about AI, but
No,
so you have
fine.
1 minute to rant, talk about anything you want about AI.
Sure.
Ready? Go.
All right. Well, I think that we're hearing a lot about ChatGPT and a lot of noise around that, and I think that sort of my rant is really welcome to the club. I think things are only going to get worse, in the sense that we're going to have a lot more new things come up that completely disrupt our understanding of AI, our understanding of business, our understanding of the world. This is the Ray Kurzweil sort of drop dead units and law of accelerating returns, and we're just getting started here. So I think that brace yourself, and I think that the motto for the next year at least is just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? Like right now, business is asking questions. What are the implications of a ChatGPT for on the business side? And nobody clearly knows the answer. And to presume that anything else is true is to delude yourself.
Perfect. 1 minute. That's actually a great point.
It was, yeah.
It's time to get uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
because there's so many open questions right there. But all right, Tim, lightning round questions. Are we ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, I'll go first. So, if you can't have a CDO with both business and technical, could you start with the technical CDO who can learn the business on the job?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you can't coach height, right? And the height here is tech skills. Like it's much easier to get smart and understand how the business works and start doing things like, putting together guesstimates on return on investment for a particular solution than it is to start coding in Python.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Second lightning round question. Should analytics and the data office be bundled? Are you, like, AKI, are you a fan of CDAO?
So my intuition says yes, because that's the supply and the demand. And you don't want to separate the supply from demand. When they're separated, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt because you're not going to build the right thing, or you're not going to build it right. So neither one is a good option.
All right.
That's an interesting analogy there. It's like separating engineering and product management. Like if they're too far away from each other, weird things happen, right?
That's right.
All right, next question. Is it better to have a few unicorns on your data team or 10 more specialized team members?
Depends on which team. If I'm running a startup, I'll take the 2 unicorns. If I'm running a big organization, it's going to disrupt everything because people are going to get jealous of the unicorns because there really are unicorns. There are very few. And I don't have as much utility for them. I have very clear structure around who's doing what. Fine, but if I'm starting a company, I will spend the 10x on hiring a unicorn, and I've hired a few. I know exactly what they look like. They are rare, but when you hire one, oh my God, the ROI is through the roof.
Great answer.
Wow.
All right. Fourth question, final question. Will generative AI be a net simplifier and accelerator for data teams? Or not?
I feel like the right answer is yes. It will be and it will not be. It will simplify a lot of things that we're doing manually right now, but it will also create a lot of issues, right? Like we're seeing already ethical AI and all of this stuff, and now how do you teach a college course to, how do you check that a legal essay was not done, was not plagiarized? I think that it solves problems that creates problems at the same time, which is great. That's progress, right?
It is.
All right. Takeaway times. We had a lot. Tim, take us away with takeaways.
All right. Well, we started off with the DNA of the top part of the organization, and we talked about the CDO. And you especially, Alex, started off by talking about, the expectations and the challenges and the turnover that we experience at that level. It's a new role. Relatively speaking, expectations are high. And you use that analogy of, the average age of the S&P companies, they were a while ago, it was like 60 years. Now it's 15. Similarly, maybe, you might expect a CIO or something like that 20 years ago, 30 years ago to stay at the company for 10, 15, 20 years. The CDO is, I think the latest data is like an average tenure of about 3 years or so, right? So obviously things are changing. Some of that is to be expected, but some of that is kind of undesirable, right? It definitely makes things challenging from a resilience standpoint. So when we looked at the CDO, we also talked about like, what's their goal? And you really mentioned that it should be business value first. If you have to focus, you need to put that focus and put it on business value and put that at the center, and the technology comes after, right? Obviously the two together is best. And I think that was a theme also that we talked about today, but if you have to pick one, it's business first. Expectations. You got to turn data insights into business value. You have to kind of know enough to be dangerous, but you want to kind of have some depth, right? So we talked about this T-shaped person, and you kind of described having one of these deeper skills in a particular technical area that can really help you to build respect in the organization, and to be able to answer those types of questions like, hey, I want to use this deep learning model. Oh, do you really need to use a deep learning model for that? I really think that can be a logistic, regression. And I think that ability to command that respect and navigate those kinds of conversations ends up being important. You mentioned that technology versus business is a false dichotomy, right? You want to be able to try to address both of those. Somebody needs to be bringing the data competence, and if it's not the CDO, then that person needs to report to it. And you mentioned that the CDO. Where's the best place for them to really report? There's no ultimate answer for that. It's definitely depends on the organization. But if you want to have consistency in your data, your systems, your training, your dictionary, your ontology, then it is good to start in a centralized fashion and kind of grow from there, and then figure out kind of how to decentralize over time. And I know Juan, you probably have some more takeaways about that in a minute. And that you should really think about, is this person reporting into a value center or are they reporting into a cost center? And if you're saying that, hey, analytics is going to be a value driver for the organization, and then they're going to report into a cost center, then you got to recognize that either you're going to set them up for problems, or you need to change some of the mandate in the way that you're thinking about your CIO organization or your CFO organization or whatever it may be, to be a value driving aspect as well. And so that's pretty important. Analytics in general, is something that creates value for the organization. You mentioned Peter Drucker and how he pushed that really a business has two revenue centers. It's marketing and innovation. And so you connected that to analytics. Analytics should be focused on marketing and innovation. Juan, I'll pass it over to you. What about your takeaways?
I think that's one of the key things right now. If there's one thing to remember is you need provide value. If you want to go do that, it's through innovation, marketing, innovation, new products. Marketing is making those products accessible to the customer. So then we also talk about like the bottoms up, right? From the data engineers, the data scientists. And I like how you categorize these different types of jobs, right? You had 6 categories: professional services, corporate, FinServ, startup, government, NPOs, NGOs, and big tech. And the reason why it's important to think about these differently is because they all have different mentalities, different modalities around how they deal with technology. You gave your personal example, right? You were in academia, you got out, did your master's, and you went to join a strategic consultancy where you learned so much about the business, and that's something you could have only learned at a consultancy around that. So think about it, in a consultancy, you're going to be jumping on so many different topics. In big tech, you're going to be specialized on the topic. They don't want unicorns. While startups, on the other way, they want a unicorn. They're going to be hiring. They want somebody who can do the data engineering, the scientists, wear lots of hats at unicorn. This is a great, interesting question. Is like, if I want to become a CDO, what is my path to the CDO? Your very specific answer is like, you should be in corporate, right? You really need to understand the political skills, right? Because it's really corporate America, right? A corporate world who's going to be looking for CDOs. Who's the CDAO of Google? I don't know. Everybody does analytics over there, right? So, and if company's looking for a CDO, for people who have experience in corporate. Thinking about the bottoms up teams, you talked about what do teams need to go do when it comes to data? Said specifically, data governance, cloud integration, data management, modeling, data science, machine learning, reporting, visualization, and having that liaison to the business domains. And then eventually, as things scale, right, then you have different aspects who start focusing those domains. So your data science, machine learning will be focusing on a domain. The reporting and visualization will focus on a domain, right? Over time, that decentralization is really a manifestation of the maturity of the organization. You start having embedded analytics all very part of it. I mean, then that's why central teams won't have any more reporting dashboards teams, and they're going to be pushed out. How did we do? Anything we missed?
No, you guys did great. I feel very understood.
Well, this was all you. We just we were just paying attention to what you were saying, and you had a lot of insights in here. We're gonna throw it back to you. 3 final questions. What's your advice? Who should you invite next? And what are the resources that you follow?
Sure. So my advice is, so I started doing a series at KPMG for the younger analytics professionals in their organization. And it's also kind of catered around creating your identity and connecting and networking within the firm to create value, to help your career grow. And so the motto for that is watch your ass. And this is the ass with a capital S. And the 3 things analytics professionals that I think I push to focus on is, first ass is the sector. Everything is getting sectorized. The earlier on you decide, I'm going to be a financial services guy, I'm going to be a healthcare guy, Or, I'm going to be a consumer goods guy, girl, whoever that is. That's going to be very, very helpful because that's getting premium more and more, right? And companies like even like Microsoft, but even next layer down, like Databricks, fantastic company that's in the compute space. They're getting sectorized, like they're getting focused on specific solutions for specific industries. So the second S is the hyperscaler. Like the world is in the cloud right now, whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, fine, but choose one, get certified, get good at it. That's going to be a key differentiator. You're not just a data scientist writing Python code or a data engineer, right? You actually know how to do this within a hyperscaler. And the third S is the what I call the subdomain, right? Which is within analytics, choose a specific function. Okay, you do fraud, or you do risk analytics, or you do NLP, or you do computer vision. Choose something you specialize in that becomes a big part of who you are. And sort of the wrap around it is that, sort of tell your dragon slaying story. Go network, go connect with people, and, wrap it all around, wrap the three S's into one dragon slaying story that tells the prospective customer, employer, or even an employee about how awesome you are and why it's worth getting to know you.
That's fantastic advice. 3 S's.
Watch your ass.
Watch your ass. Who should we invite next?
So this is going to be a challenge. The most interesting man in the world, in my opinion, is Tyler Cowen. He's a professor of economics at George Mason, and he has a podcast as well. He's an economist, and he's just a brilliant person. So he's not a data scientist or analytics professional, but if you can get him on, I would highly recommend. I follow him religiously. This is kind of leading to the next question: what do I read or listen to, whatever. Yeah. So Tyler's podcast is number one. I used to be a big fan of Eric Weinstein when he ran the portal. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Harvard PhD mathematician that used to work for Peter Thiel, as an MD in his venture fund. Also fascinating. I listened to a podcast called Intelligence Squared at least once a month. I think it's one of the most interesting podcasts that kind of involves different topics from, history, literature, politics, poetry. Not a pure data science source, but just something that I find fascinating. I think those are I read the journal every day just because you got to know what's going on in business, yeah. Right? And then I follow a bunch of, for technology and data, I don't have a single source. I think I use Feedly, and I just follow whatever the Feedly article takes me to, and the sources are kind of all over the place.
All right. Well, this was a fantastic set of resources to go follow. Alex, this was a fantastic conversation. Just quickly, next week, our guest is going to be Ricardo Baeza Yates. He's a research professor at Northeastern University. He's the past VP of research of Yahoo Labs. He's a pioneer in all web work. He wrote the book on modern information retrieval. So for only computer scientists out there, if you look about web information retrieval stuff, he wrote the book on that. He's a true expert in AI. And a really good friend of mine. And next week is the web conference in Austin, which I'm the general chair of, and Ricardo's going to be there. So we're going to have a live podcast with him. And he's been one of those loud voices about bias in AI and responsible AI. So it's going to be a really great conversation. With that, Alex, thank you so much. This was a phenomenal conversation. Cheers, Tim.
Alex,
tonight.
Thank you for having me, guys.